Chapter 17 is what macroeconomics tries to explain. This chapter is an overview of macroeconomic ideas that will be addressed in the following chapters. Remember that the main concerns of macroeconomics are the unemployment rate, inflation, and providing a stable economy. And also keep in mind that, we'll go back to our root definition, macroeconomics is the study of the overall or aggregate performance of an economy. Now you might say, why are we concerned about unemployment? Real simply, and trying to keep this as simple as I can, the higher the unemployment rate, the less that society has to share. If everyone's working, we've got a real big pie to share. Everyone has lots. Where the less people that are working, the pie gets smaller and smaller, and that society has less and less to share. So it becomes quite obvious that providing employment to its citizens should be a concern of an economic unit, and full employment becomes a concern. Inflation is also a concern of economics, or macroeconomics. We seem to, as a country, we seem to want to have some inflation. When I buy a house at such and such a price, in a few years, or whenever I sell that house, I'd like to make some money on it. Even if I hadn't made any improvements, we look at that as an investment. So inflation in itself is not bad or evil, but we're concerned about being or having an economy that is changing prices so fast that the citizens cannot keep up. That yours or my salary just can't keep up with the present price of goods. Maybe today, to date this, we could say our country is probably concerned about the rising fuel prices. And some citizens might be concerned about the price of gas, and boy, will I be able to do the same things I did before. Or we may be concerned about how am I going to heat my house this winter if I use fuel. It's going to cost me a lot more than it did last year. So inflation becomes a real concern for people. And then the stable economy, we like to have economic growth. All parents probably say, boy, I'd like it better for my son or daughter than it was for me, and each generation wants that. So we do seem to want some economic growth, and we want our country to be concerned about economic growth. Then we might say, as far as economic growth and providing a stable economy, how have we done? Well, in the United States, since, if you look at a historical perspective, since the inception of the United States to now, we've certainly done a marvelous job in the United States. It's highly obvious that our country started as a real small nation. It's expanded not only geographically, but economically, where our nation, as I say, was a supplier nation, providing goods to Europe, and during the turn of the century, or before the turn of the 1900s, we started our own factory movement, and as I say, it's just quite obvious that our country has had a tremendous economic growth. How do we know about this economic growth? How do we know that we really have it? One of the measuring tools we use is called gross domestic product. And this will become a focus of our next chapter. But just in a nutshell, gross domestic product is the total value of all goods and services produced within an economic unit within a year. And we can take a look at that figure as we measure it from year to year and see that our country has had a strong, steady growth. And when I say steady, there's ups and downs, but from the beginning of our country until present day, we have had a growth. How have we done as far as employment? Our country, historically, if we take a look at it, except for the Great Depression of the 1930s, we generally have had a very satisfactory employment rate. Jobs have increased. We could take a look at World War II, where even our women left the home places and became Rosie the Riveter, or the factory workers as they were called in those days. And of course that caused some social problems when the soldiers returned from World War II. But we can say that we've gone to an economy that was providing a minor level of employment to an economy that has provided much employment. We even have a law in the United States that was passed in 1946, or an act called the Employment Act of 1946. The date there is important, 1946, right after World War II, where in this law we require the federal government to promote maximum employment. With all of the soldiers returning from World War II, there was a concern that would there be jobs for these soldiers? And our country decided that we were going to try and make sure. In 1978, we passed the Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act, which set a target of 4% unemployment rate. That might be a little bit unrealistic, but we've tried to establish that level of employment. So we have done a good job with employment. Then as far as providing the stable economy, if you'll excuse me for just a minute here, we have had an economy that, if we say 1776 and 2005, we've grown. Every year has been better. There has been an increase. In fact, over all the years, the growth has been around 2% a year. Now, when we look at that, we might think it's been a slow, steady rise. In actuality, if we went, the ride has been bumpy. But again, the general trend has been to go from here to a higher level. So even though it hasn't been a smooth ride, it's been bumpy at times, we have increased. When we talk about the bumpy ride, I'd like to mention just the term business cycles. And I'll smooth those bumpy rides out and make them like this. And we have a business cycles, the ups and downs of an economy, where we would call this period right here, this is a period of expansion. And we'd say this is the peak. This is a recession. We might refer to this as the trough. So I just want to illustrate that it hasn't necessarily been a real smooth ride. There have been ups and downs, and obviously we like the periods of expansion. Jobs are more readily available, salaries are increasing, etc. I'd also like to mention in this chapter, we've talked about our government providing and ensuring full employment and regulating our economy. This is a result of an economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes. And we'll discuss this in a later chapter, but I would like to introduce it now. John Maynard Keynes was an English economist who introduced the idea that in times of dire straits, the government should step in and help an economy or help its citizens. And he advocated the governments of Europe doing so. In the 1930s, in our terrible depression here in the United States, Franklin Roosevelt followed the policies of the economist John Maynard Keynes and said that in certain dire situations, the government should step in and provide jobs. We know that historically here in the United States, when President Roosevelt in the 1930s started such programs as the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the WPA, which were just examples of the United States government hiring citizens to give them employment, to give them a salary so that they could buy goods and services and stimulate our economy, and hopefully stimulate our economy from the depths of the Depression.